"Just clean the floor, mop boy, you don't tell me what to do," the judge said to the janitor. "In a few minutes she's going to regret those lines." Hello everyone, before we begin today's story I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more jaw-dropping stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's get back to our main character. Have you ever heard a man's dignity break? Not from fists. Not from violence. Just words. Words, sharpened with arrogance, can cut deeper than any blade. It happened on a Tuesday morning, inside the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. The time was 8:47 a.m., courtroom 4. And the man standing there wasn't a lawyer. Wasn't a clerk. Wasn't anyone the judge expected to hear from. He was a janitor. At least, that's who she thought he was. His name, on the roster, at least, was Elijah Cole. A quiet, middle-aged man. Dark skin. Work-worn hands. His uniform pressed, his voice steady. A man used to being invisible. He was the one who cleaned up after the rest of them had gone home. But that morning, he did something different. He asked to be heard. He spoke gently, not demanding, not raising his voice. He said, "Your Honor, forgive me for interrupting. I only wanted to bring forward a matter of concern. For months, some of the staff, they've spoken in ways that are demeaning. Disrespectful. And when I tried to file, the complaints never reached your chambers. I've counted them. 47 complaints, in 15 years. Now imagine the sound that followed, the shuffle of papers, a cough in the back, a whisper, 47. His words didn't shake. They didn't accuse. They were measured. Steady. But steady truth, when it falls on the wrong ears, is nothing more than an inconvenience. And to Judge Meredith Lang, it was worse than that. Her voice cut through the room, sharp, mocking. "Excuse me? Did I hear correctly? A janitor, filing an ethics complaint? That's rich." A couple of clerks laughed under their breath. You could hear a chair scrape against the floor. A phone buzzed in someone's pocket. That laugh, it wasn't just a laugh. It was the sound of superiority, the kind of sound that says, "You don't belong here. You never will." But Elijah didn't flinch. He stayed calm. He said, "I mean no disrespect, Your Honor. I only ask that my concerns be written into the record. For fairness' sake." The judge snapped back instantly, louder this time, her words dripping with disdain. "Oh, for fairness' sake. Tell me, Mr. Mop and Bucket, how many law degrees do you hold? Harvard? Yale? No? Then perhaps the record doesn't need your opinion." That line landed like a slap. You could hear the collective gasp. A ripple of whispers spread across the courtroom. "She called him Mop and Bucket, did you hear that?" Phones were already being unlocked. Screens lit up. Somebody hit record. It went on like this for 14 minutes. 14 minutes of dismissal, of mockery, of comparing him to the dirt he cleaned from the floor. At 8:51, she told him to stay in his place. At 8:54, she told him he was wasting the court's time. And at 8:58, she delivered her final blow. She leaned back, smug, and said, "Mr. Cole, when the history of this courthouse is written, no one will remember your name. You're a janitor. You sweep, you mop, and then you go home. That's all." And then there was silence. Not the comfortable kind. Not the respectful kind. This was silence so sharp it cut through the air. The kind of silence where everyone knew a line had been crossed. You could hear only the sound of breathing. A throat clearing nervously. That silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Long enough for the shame to sting. Long enough for her arrogance to fill the room. But not long enough for the truth to stay hidden. Because the man she mocked was not who she thought he was. He was far more. And her laughter, that cruel little laugh, was about to echo far beyond the walls of that courtroom. Have you ever heard dignity shatter? Not from fists. Not from the crash of violence. But from words, careless, arrogant words. Words that cut in places fists can't reach. That sound, it happened inside the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. On a Tuesday morning. Courtroom 4. The time was 8:47 a.m. Most mornings in that courtroom looked the same. Attorneys fussing over binders. Clerks whispering about schedules. The judge tapping her gavel impatiently, eager to get through her docket. Nothing unusual. Nothing remarkable. But that morning, something different happened. Because the man standing before Judge Meredith Lang wasn't who anyone expected to hear from. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a clerk. He wasn't anyone the judge thought worthy of attention. He was a janitor. At least, that's who they thought he was. His name was Elijah Cole. A quiet, middle-aged black man. His work uniform pressed neatly, though most never noticed. His hands strong, scarred from labor, the kind of hands that carried both strength and humility. His voice calm, deliberate. A man used to being invisible. For 15 years, Elijah had moved silently through that courthouse. Every night, when the lawyers had gone home, he stayed behind. Sweeping floors that echoed with the footsteps of power. Polishing the marble no one ever thanked him for. Emptying the trash bins filled with notes, arguments, fragments of law that meant everything to the world outside and nothing once discarded. People passed him by daily. Some nodded politely. Most didn't bother. To them, he was part of the background, like the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead or the hum of the air vents. Present, but unseen. But Elijah noticed things. He always had. The way voices changed when speaking to people they thought unimportant. The way laughter grew sharper when aimed at someone who couldn't answer back. He listened. He remembered. And that morning, he decided to speak. He waited until the courtroom settled. He cleared his throat softly. And then, in a voice that was respectful but unshaken, he said, "Your Honor, forgive me for interrupting. I only wanted to bring forward a matter of concern." At first, no one paid attention. A janitor's voice inside courtroom 4 was nothing unusual, it was background noise. But he continued. For months, some of the staff have spoken in ways that are demeaning. Disrespectful. And when I tried to file complaints, they never reached your chambers. I have counted them. 47 complaints, in 15 years. The words landed like a stone tossed into still water. Small at first, but the ripples spread. A cough in the back. The creak of a chair. A whisper traveling down the row, 47. Elijah's words were not emotional. They were measured. Precise. That was his strength. But truth, spoken in the wrong room, is not heard as truth. It is heard as inconvenience. And to Judge Meredith Lang, it was worse than that. Her voice cracked like a whip. "Excuse me? Did I hear correctly? A janitor, filing an ethics complaint? That's rich." The word janitor hung in the air like an insult. A couple of clerks laughed quietly. Someone muttered, "Unbelievable." For most people, that would have been enough to retreat. But Elijah didn't flinch. He lifted his head, his voice still calm. "I mean no disrespect, Your Honor. I only ask that my concerns be written into the record. For fairness' sake." The moment he said fairness, her face tightened. Fairness, to her, was her domain. Her courtroom. Not his. Oh, for fairness' sake, she snapped. Tell me, Mr. Mop and Bucket, how many law degrees do you hold? Harvard? Yale? No? Then perhaps the record doesn't need your opinion. That line landed like a slap. You could hear it in the ripple of gasps. A woman near the back murmured, "Did she just?" Clerks shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A junior attorney whispered to his colleague, "She called him Mop and Bucket, God." Phones came out. Screens lit up. Someone pressed record. Elijah stayed calm. "My request is simple, Your Honor. To be heard. To have my words entered. Nothing more." But Judge Lang wasn't finished. At 8:51, she told him to know his place. At 8:54, she told him he was wasting the court's time. At 8:56, she compared him to the dirt he swept from the floor. Every few minutes, her tone grew sharper, the mockery more open. "Perhaps you should file your complaints with the broom closet," she sneered once. Another time, "This is a court of law, not a suggestion box for custodial staff." The whispers in the gallery grew. A man muttered, "This is going too far." Another voice answered, "Careful, don't cross her." But Elijah still stood, shoulders straight, eyes steady. He absorbed every word, every insult. His silence wasn't weakness. It was discipline. And then came her final blow. At 8:58, she leaned back in her chair, smug, and said, "Mr. Cole, when the history of this courthouse is written, no one will remember your name. You're a janitor. You sweep, you mop, and then you go home. That's all." Her words cut through the room like glass. And then, silence. Not the respectful kind. Not the ordered kind. This silence was sharp, jagged. It hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Everyone felt it. Even those who had laughed minutes earlier. The line had been crossed. The air was heavier now, heavy with shame, heavy with arrogance. That silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds long enough for the sting of her words to settle. 3 seconds long enough for the tension to tighten in every chest. But not long enough for the truth to remain hidden. Because the man she mocked, the man she reduced to Mop and Bucket, was not who she thought he was. He was far more. And her laughter, that cruel, dismissive laugh, would not remain hers. It would follow her. It would define her. And in time, it would destroy her. Because dignity may be mocked. But dignity, once revealed, cannot be erased. The judge thought she'd ended it with that line, telling him he was nothing but a janitor. For most people, that would have been enough. That kind of insult, delivered in public, under the shadow of authority, would have sent anyone retreating back into silence. Most men would have lowered their gaze, gripped their mop tighter, and walked away. That's what she expected. That's what everyone in that courtroom expected. But Elijah Cole did not move. He didn't bow his head. He didn't shuffle his feet. He didn't let his hands tremble against the mop handle. He just stood there. Calm. Steady. Almost as if this entire scene had been rehearsed, not by him, but by her. As if he knew that arrogance would always reveal itself if you gave it enough time. The mop rested at his side, a tool of labor, yes, but in that moment, it might as well have been a staff planted in the ground. A symbol that said, "Here I stand. I will not be moved." And then, finally, he spoke again. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't rise to match the grandeur of the courtroom. It was quiet, deliberate, steady. But it carried weight. The kind of weight that doesn't come from shouting, but from certainty. "Your Honor," he began, his words careful, respectful, "I do not seek recognition. I only ask for dignity. These walls are supposed to shelter fairness. If the least among us cannot speak here, then who can? Now, pause with me and imagine that. A janitor, standing in a federal courtroom, speaking not about wages or hours, not about his own pride, but about fairness. About dignity. About the very foundation those marble halls were built to symbolize. For a moment, time seemed to stretch. You might expect reverence in that pause, heads bowed, people reflecting, perhaps even a flicker of shame from those who had chuckled before. But no. The silence that followed wasn't holy. It was mocking. From the clerk's table came the sound of a scoff. Not even hidden. Someone leaned back in their chair and muttered, "What is he doing?" Another voice, lower, half laughing, answered, "He doesn't know when to stop." And that is how arrogance multiplies. One voice mocking. Another joining in. Soon, a chorus of superiority begins to hum, even in silence. But Elijah didn't falter. He didn't snap back, didn't let their small laughter ignite anger in his chest. He held the silence, let their whispers swirl around him, and then he waited. Patient, unshaken. That patience rattled her. Judge Meredith Lang leaned forward. The chair beneath her gave a long, slow creak, a sound that felt heavier than it should have. It was the sound of someone preparing to strike with words, of someone who believed her voice alone could put an end to any challenge. And then she did strike. "Mr. Cole," she said, sharp and cutting, every syllable sharpened like glass, "do you understand where you are? This is a courtroom. Not a complaint box. Not the lobby of some building where the janitor can air his grievances to anyone passing by. This is the seat of justice." She let the word justice hang in the air, as though she owned it. As though the concept belonged to her robe and her robe alone. "If I entertained every whimper from staff," she continued, her tone curling into disdain, "we'd never finish a single case." She didn't stop there. She wanted to bury him, not just silence him. And so she pressed forward. Her words slowed, each one dipped in contempt. "You. Push. A mop." She paused after each syllable, so the entire room felt the sting of that reduction. "That is your role." She leaned back slightly, her voice now low but cruelly confident. "You do not dictate mine." And there it was. The line. The moment where she drew a border between human dignity and authority, as if the two could not coexist. As if his labor, his skin, his silence, disqualified him from ever raising a concern in her court. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke. No one intervened. Some because they feared her. Some because they agreed with her. And some because they didn't believe a janitor could stand his ground against the weight of a federal judge's scorn. But Elijah Cole did not step back. He did not retreat into the corner they tried to box him in. He had carried too much silence in his life to be intimidated by one more attempt. Because Elijah understood something the judge never did, power is not always loud. Sometimes, it is quiet. Sometimes, it waits. Sometimes, it speaks only once, but when it does, its echo cannot be ignored. And in that courtroom, at that moment, Elijah Cole was waiting. Her words were met with a few muffled chuckles. Not laughter like you'd hear at a comedy, not the free sound of joy. No, people in power laugh differently. It's never loud, never uncontrolled. It's sharp. Clipped. The kind of laugh that slices through the air just enough to signal superiority. Just enough to say, "We're above you." That was the sound filling that room. And yet Elijah, calm as ever, did not bend beneath it. He answered in the same quiet tone he'd used before, but this time his words carried a little more weight, a little more steel. "With respect, Your Honor," he said, "justice is not confined to titles. It lives in how we treat each other." Think about that for a moment. In a room full of degrees, robes, and credentials, a janitor dared to speak of justice. Not as something hidden in books, but as something measured in human dignity. The statement should have given pause. It should have made someone, anyone, reconsider the balance of power in that moment. But Judge Meredith Lang, she wasn't interested in reflection. You could almost hear the rolling of her eyes. Her voice came back fast, sharp, like a whip striking through the air. "Justice," she snapped. "And you think you are the authority on justice? Tell me, how many cases have you tried? How many rulings have you written? How many years have you studied the law?" She didn't wait for his answer. She didn't need it. To her, the silence of his credentials was all the proof she required. And so she struck again, with a laugh. Not long. Not kind. Short. Sharp. Cruel. That's what I thought. The courtroom stirred. You could hear the shift of bodies, people leaning in as though each word were fire threatening to burn the whole room. The air itself felt tense, brittle, ready to break. Phones buzzed again, this time, not hidden. Screens lit up, recording icons glowed. History was being documented in real time, and everyone knew it. One whisper rose above the rest. Clear, certain, and almost prophetic, "She's gonna regret this." But in that moment, the judge didn't hear it, or maybe she chose not to. Because Meredith Lang felt untouchable. The robe on her shoulders was armor, the bench beneath her was a fortress, and the silence of the courtroom was fuel for her authority. So she pressed on. Her voice rose, dripping with superiority, arrogance climbing higher with each word. "Mr. Cole, let me be perfectly clear," she declared. "When I put on this robe, I did not swear to answer to the complaints of janitors. I swore to uphold the law. And the law has no patience for the petty grievances of hired help." Petty grievances. Hired help. Those words hit harder than the laugh that came before. They landed heavy, each syllable a dismissal of his humanity, a declaration that his worth began and ended with the broom in his hand. The room reacted. A gasp here. A throat clearing there. Even some of her clerks, those who had been silent, complicit, shifted in their seats, uneasy. They recognized cruelty when it turned so sharp it cut the very institution they served. But Judge Lang did not stop. She leaned back in her chair, and her voice shifted again, almost casual now, smug in its authority. She was no longer defending her power. She was enjoying it. "You should be grateful," she said. The word, grateful, drawn out, dipped in disdain. "Grateful to even stand here, breathing the same air as those who matter. But you," she paused, savoring the cruelty, "you mistake proximity for importance." And then, with a tone that was almost playful, she twisted the knife. "Go back to your mop, Mr. Cole. Before you slip on the mess you're making." The sentence landed like a final blow. Not loud, not shouted, but sharp, deliberate, and humiliating. And for a moment, the courtroom froze. The air turned still, the sounds that had filled the chamber only seconds before, buzzing phones, whispered voices, shifting bodies, all stopped at once. Because even in a room built on hierarchy, even among those accustomed to arrogance, there are lines that should not be crossed. And with that one sentence, Judge Meredith Lang had crossed it. Now, have you ever heard silence so loud it felt like the air itself was listening? That was the silence in courtroom 4. Not the quiet of respect. Not the pause of reflection. This was a silence thick with tension, swollen with unspoken questions. Every person in that chamber, clerks, attorneys, officers, was caught in the same stillness. Nobody dared move. Nobody dared speak. It was as if the very walls leaned in closer, as if marble and wood alike waited to see what would happen next. And here's what makes it unforgettable: Elijah Cole did not break. He did not lower his eyes. He did not stammer over his words. He did not retreat into the corner she tried to build for him with her contempt. No. He let the silence stretch. 1 second. 2. 3. Long enough for her words, the insult, the humiliation, to echo in the minds of everyone present. Long enough for each person in that room to feel the sting of what had been said. Long enough for the judge herself to start believing she had won. And then Elijah spoke. Slowly. Deliberately. A man not rushing, not desperate, not afraid. "The record will remember, Your Honor," he said. "Even if you choose not to." Those words didn't shout. They didn't thunder. But they landed with a weight no gavel could match. They hung in the air like smoke, curling through every corner of that courtroom, refusing to dissipate. People shifted in their seats. Chairs creaked under the discomfort. You could almost hear the heartbeat of the room quicken. And then, whispers. Quiet at first, darting across the chamber like sparks. "He's not scared. Did you hear that? What if?" And then they stopped. As if everyone suddenly realized at the same time, something larger was unfolding here. This was not the humiliation they thought they were witnessing. This was something else. But Judge Lang didn't see it. Or perhaps she refused to. She sneered, clinging to her authority like a shield. "The record," she mocked. "Mr. Cole, history does not remember janitors. History remembers judges. History remembers power. And you, sir, have none." Her voice was dripping with certainty. Certainty that history was hers to write. Certainty that power sat only in her chair, in her robe, in the title printed before her name. And that was her mistake. Because power, real power, doesn't need a robe. It doesn't need a title. It doesn't need to announce itself with fanfare or arrogance. Real power waits. Quiet. Patient. Until the moment arrives. And Elijah Cole, his moment was coming. By now, the tension in the room was unbearable. Phones buzzed more frequently, no longer tucked away discreetly. Screens glowed in hands. Messages were sent, recordings captured. A ripple of whispers moved from row to row, a current no gavel could contain. Someone muttered, barely audible but piercing enough to stick, "This is going to blow up." And then, the sound of the clock. 9 o'clock, sharp. Its chime cut through the chamber like a bell tolling in a cathedral. A reminder that time was moving forward, even as the room seemed frozen in the weight of what had just been said. 9 o'clock. The exchange had lasted 13 minutes. 13 minutes of arrogance. 13 minutes of condescension. 13 minutes of mockery echoing through marble halls that were meant to symbolize justice. And in that 13th minute, something shifted. Not with shouting. Not with anger. But with patience. Because Elijah Cole simply stood there. Calm. Steady. Unmoved. The judge believed she had crushed him. The clerks thought they had witnessed a humiliation. But what they had actually seen was the setup. The careful, deliberate setup for a reveal that would ripple far beyond that room. Because the man mocked as Mr. Mop and Bucket carried a truth none of them were prepared for. A truth waiting, like real power does, quiet, patient, until the moment to strike arrived. And in just a few minutes, that truth would shatter everything. If you're already feeling the weight of this moment, hit that like button. Let's make sure this part of the story isn't forgotten. The silence after Judge Lang's laughter is not ordinary silence. It is heavy, almost physical, as though the air itself has tightened around the word she has just thrown into the room. Everyone feels it, though no one quite knows why. They don't understand the shift, not yet, but they sense it, the way you sense a storm before the first drop of rain. It's not reverent silence, not respectful. It is uneasy. The kind that makes people fidget in their chairs, makes throats clear, makes whispers flicker from one corner to another. And in that silence, Elijah Cole remains where he has been all along. A plain uniform. a mop handle at his side. To anyone looking, still just a man of maintenance. Still the one expected to clean up after others, not stand before them. But it is not the broom in his hand that carries weight, it is the steadiness in his stance, the calm in his breathing, the quiet authority in his voice when he speaks again. He does not shout. He does not rush. His tone is measured, careful, every word placed with intention. I brought this complaint because justice doesn't begin at the bench, he says. It begins in the way every person is treated inside these walls. The words hang there, simple but immovable. And the room reacts as though struck. Some scoff, a reflex born of arrogance. Others whisper, low but audible, the sound of disbelief creeping into their voices. A few lean to one another, murmuring questions they don't dare voice too loudly. Judge Lang, seated high above him, smirks, her expression carved into disdain. Her voice, when it comes, is sharp, dismissive, designed to cut down rather than consider. Spare us the sermon, Mr. Janitor, she says, dripping with mockery. We have no time for fairy tales about equality. She waves her hand then, as though brushing away a fly, reducing his words to nothing more than a nuisance in her courtroom. Go back to your mop, she adds, her tone casual, cruel in its ease. This court has more important matters. It should end there. That's what she expects. That's what everyone has been trained to expect, that a man like Elijah, spoken to in that tone, dismissed in that way, would bow his head, step back, and disappear into the background where people of power think he belongs. But Elijah does not bow. He does not step back. He straightens. The change is small, subtle, but unmistakable. His shoulders square. His head lifts. And though his hands still rest on the handle of a broom, his presence fills the space differently now. It is as though the ground beneath him has shifted, and for the first time, others in the room feel it. His next words are not rushed. He does not fire them back like an insult. He lays them down, one by one, with the deliberate clarity of a man who has carried them long enough to know their true weight. My name, he says slowly, is Elijah David Cole. The sound of it lingers, heavier than expected. To some, the name is only a name, spoken by a janitor who has stepped beyond his place. To others, those who have been paying attention in recent weeks, it stirs something faint, a half-memory, a headline, a confirmation hearing glimpsed in passing. But no one speaks yet. The silence that follows feels stretched, suspended, eternal. And though Judge Lang narrows her eyes, unimpressed, though she opens her mouth to demand what that name is supposed to mean, the balance in the room has already begun to shift. Because Elijah Cole has just taken the first step out of invisibility. And with nothing more than his name, he has placed a crack in the foundation of the arrogance surrounding him. That crack is small, but it is enough. Enough for the truth to start pressing through. Enough for everyone present to feel, even if they don't yet understand, that the janitor before them is not the man they thought he was. And in that moment, with those few, deliberate words, my name is Elijah David Cole, the courtroom does not realize it, but history itself has just entered the room. The pause that follows his name is not just long, it feels eternal. It stretches, winding itself around every person in that room until they are caught inside it. Some of them, the ones who pay close attention to politics, who read the news every morning with their coffee, recognize it instantly. Elijah David Cole. Their eyes widen. Their breath hitches. Others blink in confusion, lips parted, trying to place it, trying to dig through memory for where they've seen that name before. And high above, Judge Lang narrows her eyes. She hears the words, but she does not yet feel their weight. Her expression sharpens into impatience, as if the very sound of his calm composure offends her. With a tone meant to belittle, she spits the single word. And? Elijah does not flinch. He does not shift his stance. He does not allow her interruption to cut into the cadence of what he has come to say. His voice remains steady, deliberate, each syllable crafted as though hammered into steel. Appointed 3 weeks ago by the President of the United States. Confirmed by the Senate Judiciary Committee after 30 hours of questioning. Sworn in last Friday. Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. And those words do not float in the air. They fall. They strike. They land like a gavel slammed against hardwood, carrying finality, authority, an echo that no one can ignore. The sound of the room changes instantly. Gasps ripple across the benches, not in a trickle but in a wave. Not one, not two, but dozens of voices drawing in breath at once, the sound of realization dawning like lightning splitting a dark sky. The whispers that follow are sharp, urgent, impossible to contain. Supreme Court? He's the one, the new justice. Cole? That's him? The murmurs weave together into a current, each voice feeding into the storm until the name is repeated, over and over again, spoken with growing conviction, Justice Cole. Justice Cole. And then the smirk, the shield Judge Lang has worn so easily, begins to fracture. It cracks at the edges. Her lips falter. The certainty she carried in every insult, in every dismissal, trembles. Her laugh comes next, but it is not the sharp, confident laugh she wielded moments before. It is jagged, thin, trembling at the edges. No, she sputters. No, this is absurd. A janitor? You expect me to believe. But her denial cannot finish its climb. Because Elijah does not argue with her. He does not raise his voice or match her scoff with anger. Instead, he reaches into his uniform, slow, unhurried, and draws out a single document. It is a letter. Official. Signed. Marked by ink and seal. He steps forward and lays it on the clerk's desk, not with flourish, not with arrogance, but with the finality of a man who has no need to embellish truth. When he speaks, the words are measured, undeniable. Every word of it true, he says. Every credential accounted for. Every oath already taken. The murmurs don't just rise, they roll, like a tide that no one can hold back. At first it is scattered, a few voices whispering his name in disbelief. But soon it spreads. The benches creak as people lean forward, leaning closer to their neighbors, needing to confirm what they've just heard. Justice Cole. Cole, it is him. My God, the new justice. Here. The name itself begins to transform in the room. A minute ago, it was nothing, a janitor's name, forgettable, unimportant. But now? Now it is heavy, reverent, the way a courtroom speaks the names Marshall or Ginsburg or Holmes. The syllables carry new weight, new gravity, as though the air itself bends around them. At the bench, Judge Lang feels it. She feels the shift the way a ship feels the tide changing under its hull. The certainty she stood on is dissolving, slipping out from under her feet. Her voice, which once cracked through the room like a whip, now betrays her. You, she stammers, the word caught in her throat. You tricked us. You came here to humiliate this court. But her accusation is weak. It is not the blow she intends, it comes out brittle, almost desperate. Because everyone can see what she does not want to admit, this moment is not about her anymore. And Elijah. Elijah does not gloat. He does not sneer or raise his chin in triumph. Instead, his voice softens, almost gentle, as though he is offering her a chance to hear herself clearly. I came here to see how this court treats those it believes to be beneath notice. I did not come to humiliate anyone. I came to witness the truth. The truth. It doesn't strike like a gavel. It seeps, it spreads, until it fills every corner of the chamber. Because the truth is no longer confined to Elijah's words. It has been etched into memory, woven into the whispers still coursing through the room. Every clerk, every reporter, every bystander, each of them will carry it out into the world. And the world, once it hears, will not unhear. People will replay his words. They will repeat them. They will tell the story of a man dismissed as a janitor, mocked for his broom, revealing himself as Justice of the Supreme Court. And each retelling will sharpen it, polish it, make it clearer. His revelation has already escaped the walls, and there is no robe, no gavel, no authority high enough to silence it now. The silence that follows is not empty. It is full of realization, of reckoning, of the weight of what has just shifted. Even the hum of fluorescent light seems louder, as if the building itself is straining to hear what comes next. Judge Meredith Lang feels the silence pressing in on her. And for the first time in her career, she realizes the robe she wears does not shield her. The bench she sits behind does not elevate her. Because the balance of power has shifted, not just away from her, but away from everything she thought the system would protect. She built her authority on position, on hierarchy, on the illusion that some lives are too small to matter. But in one unshakable moment, that illusion has shattered. Because the man she mocked as Mr. Mop and Bucket now stands revealed as one of the 9 most powerful voices in American law. And there is no broom in his hand anymore. Only authority. The kind of authority that does not need to announce itself. The kind that does not rise by insult, or diminish others to prove its height. The kind of authority that sits quiet, calm, steady, until the moment it is undeniable. And in that courtroom, in that silence, authority belongs to Elijah Cole. Be honest, were you shocked? Or did you see it coming? Drop your thoughts below. The moment Elijah Cole spoke his name, the entire courtroom shifted. You could feel it, not just in the air, not just in the silence, but in the very posture of the people crammed into those benches. Gasps tore through the room like an unseen ripple. Some covered their mouths. Others froze, blinking in disbelief, as if they'd misheard. And Judge Lang, her voice cracked like a pane of glass under pressure. That's impossible, she stammered, but her words lacked the authority they once carried. For the first time in that chamber, she sounded small. But here's the thing about truth, once spoken, it doesn't stay still. It spreads. It clings. It escapes the very walls meant to contain it. Because even before Lang could recover, the sound of hurried fingers on glass screens filled the room. Dozens of phones already pointed toward Elijah Cole. Some held steady, capturing every second. Others were lowered just enough for frantic texts to fly across the digital ether. Whispered voices carried through the rows. Send it to me. Post it now. Are you watching this? The truth was no longer just in the room. It was multiplying, leaking out through calls, messages, recordings. It was already gone, beyond her control, beyond anyone's control. By noon, the first headlines appeared. At first, cautious, unconfirmed reports suggest newly appointed Justice Elijah David Cole appeared at D.C. courthouse. Then bolder, breaking, Justice Cole mocked as janitor during court appearance. By mid-afternoon, the disbelief had become a spectacle. National anchors wore the same expression, the half-smile of professionals trained not to react, but unable to hide the sheer weight of the absurdity. One anchor delivered it without embellishment, letting the words themselves do the damage. Breaking news. Reports confirm that newly appointed Supreme Court Justice Elijah David Cole appeared this morning inside a Washington courtroom undercover, disguised as a janitor. According to multiple recordings now circulating, Judge Meredith Lang mocked him, calling him, quote, Mr. Mop and Bucket. The video has been viewed over 2 million times in less than 6 hours. 2 million. 6 hours. And that was only the beginning. The story spread like wildfire, because people don't just consume stories like that. They repeat them. They amplify them. They sharpen them into a single devastating sentence. A federal judge mocked a Supreme Court justice, thinking he was a janitor. And inside the courthouse itself, the tremors were immediate. Staff who had laughed only minutes earlier now huddled together in whispers. Their voices carried guilt, panic, disbelief. "Did you see it? It's already online. It's everywhere. Oh God, it's everywhere. They're going to know we laughed." Even the clerks, those who had smirked when Lang delivered her cruelest lines, now shifted uncomfortably, avoiding each other's eyes, their faces pale under the fluorescent lights. Judge Lang herself retreated into her chambers. The doors slammed shut as if wood and brass could protect her from what was coming. But inside, behind those heavy doors, the storm was already breaking. Phones rang. Lines blinked. Assistants scrambled. And Judge Meredith Lang, who had ruled from the bench with iron certainty, who had cut down petitioners with words sharp enough to draw blood, was suddenly the one cornered. Her voice rose, frantic now, cracking with the strain. "This isn't fair. I didn't know who he was." But here's the irony she never saw coming: that excuse, that plea, was the very indictment of her character. Because the world would not care whether she knew who he was. The world would ask only one question: if she mocked him when she thought he was a janitor, how did she treat everyone else? And in that instant, Judge Lang's protest wasn't a defense. It was a confession. The reply from her superior was colder than steel. "That's the point. You didn't treat him with dignity. And now, everyone knows it." Those words broke through Judge Lang's frantic protests like a blade through paper. Because in that single sentence, her defense crumbled. It didn't matter that she hadn't known who Elijah Cole was. That was the whole indictment. The robe she wore was not meant to bend in deference to power, it was meant to safeguard dignity for all. And she had stripped it away, casually, gleefully, until the very foundation of her authority turned to ash. And then came the avalanche. At first, it was a few murmurs from investigative reporters digging through old files. But within hours, it was headlines, published with the merciless speed of truth unchained. The picture they painted was darker than the moment in courtroom 4. 47 formal complaints. Not one, not two, 47. They stretched back over 15 years. Patterns of bias. Allegations of verbal harassment. Accusations that she belittled defendants, mocked staff, dismissed petitioners before they finished their sentences. Each line of each report, once hidden, now spread across screens like scars suddenly illuminated under harsh light. And the money, $2.3 million in settlements. Cases buried, signatures bought, dignity traded for silence. The public had never seen the sum, but now it flashed across Chiron's in bold white letters: 2.3 million to bury Judge Lang complaints. The internet did what it always does when handed fuel and fire. It exploded. Hashtags lit up every platform, trending in hours, multiplying by the minute. Hashtag Justice for Cole. Hashtag Mop and Bucket. Hashtag Dignity on the Bench. They weren't just hashtags. They were verdicts. They were sentences written not by a gavel but by millions of fingers typing in unison. And beneath them came the comments. Endless, relentless, like a flood that couldn't be stopped. She laughed at a Supreme Court justice. Career over. Justice Cole is the people's justice. Respect. 47 complaints. And they let her keep her robe? Imagine how she treated people who didn't have power. Every line read like testimony. Every post was a nail in the coffin of her reputation. What had begun as a single confrontation was no longer about Judge Lang alone. It had swelled into something larger, a national mirror held up for everyone to see. A conversation about arrogance, about class, about race, about the quiet cruelty baked into systems that hide behind marble walls. And for the first time in her long career, Judge Meredith Lang was no longer the one speaking from the bench. She was the one being judged. Within 48 hours, the institution moved with the kind of precision reserved for damage control, not justice. The language of the statement was stripped of emotion, flat as stone, effective immediately. Judge Meredith Lang is relieved of her docket. Pending investigation, she is barred from hearing cases. It read less like a reprimand and more like a surgical excision. A tumor being cut away before it poisoned the whole body. Behind closed doors, the conversations were even colder. Words that leaked from those meetings carried no sympathy, no defense. One voice summed it up with brutal clarity: public trust is bleeding. Termination is on the table. And in that single phrase, termination is on the table, her years of power, her robes, her courtroom, her authority all seemed to collapse into a pile of dust. She wasn't a judge anymore. She was a liability. By the end of the week, her name was no longer one that commanded fear or respect. It was everywhere, yes, but not in celebration. Not in honor. It was shorthand. A cautionary tale. The judge who mocked the wrong man. Because the world had heard her laugh. And laughter, when it's directed downward, at those already carrying weight, is never forgotten. It echoes. It festers. It clings to the one who delivered it like a stain that can't be washed away. But here's the part most people missed in the storm of headlines, hashtags, and panels of experts speaking over each other. It wasn't just about one cruel exchange in a single courtroom. It wasn't just about one insult. It was about the scaffolding that had held her up all these years. A system that had looked at 47 complaints and shrugged. That had signed checks totaling $2.3 million to silence the wounded, instead of disciplining the one who inflicted the wounds. A system that had nodded, promoted, defended, and shielded her until the very moment her mask slipped, and the cameras caught it. Her downfall wasn't a collapse. It wasn't sudden. It was an unveiling. The kind of revelation that doesn't tear a person down so much as it reveals they were hollow all along. Because the disguise, the real disguise, had never belonged to Elijah Cole. His broom, his uniform, his silence, that was temporary. The disguise belonged to her. Her robe. Her bench. Her gavel. All of it had been cover for a truth too many already knew, but no one had been willing to say aloud. And as her career dissolved in real time, carried away by the tide of her own arrogance, one voice rose above the chaos. Calm. Steady. The same voice that had stood patient in courtroom 4, holding nothing but dignity as his weapon. Elijah Cole spoke, not to punish, not to mock, not to gloat, but to remind. Dignity is the foundation of justice. And justice is not a title. It is a voice. And for the first time in a long time, the nation listened. This is just one story, but there are countless more about power, arrogance, and truth waiting to be told. Subscribe now so you don't miss them. 6 months. Half a year. That's all it took for a career that had once looked untouchable to dissolve into a cautionary tale. The courthouse in Washington still stands the same, pillars of stone, marble floors, the heavy air of history, but the rhythm inside has shifted. There are new clerks at the desks. Different names on the dockets. And one name conspicuously absent, Judge Meredith Lang. Her absence is not spoken of loudly. It lingers like an echo in a hallway, something people notice but do not discuss unless pressed. The plaque once bearing her name was polished clean, the letters stripped away, as though erasing her presence could erase her memory. But memory clings. It clings in whispers between staffers. Remember when she? Do you think she ever? And it clings in that cold little sentence etched into the online record, removed from the bench. Her fall was not slow, not gradual. It was sharp, decisive, like a curtain being pulled back on a stage no longer hers to command. The investigation did not stretch out for years. It concluded with the swiftness of inevitability. 47 complaints confirmed. Pages of testimony, some bitter, some weary, all consistent. Former clerks spoke freely for the first time in their careers. Lawyers recalled moments of humiliation they had buried. Staff detailed meetings that ended in tears. And the settlements, the millions of dollars that had been pushed into silence, finally had numbers beside them. 2.3 million. Each dollar a reminder of someone who had tried to speak, someone who had been paid for their silence, someone who never received the justice they deserved. The report could have ended with statistics. But instead, it repeated one word like a drumbeat. Pattern. A pattern of disdain. A pattern of abuse. A pattern of power wielded not to protect but to belittle, to dismiss, to crush. And when that word appeared over and over again, her defense collapsed. There was no longer any misunderstanding, no isolated incidents, no exaggerations by the disgruntled. It was not one mistake, not one lapse, it was a legacy of contempt. So now, for Meredith Lang, there were no more gavels. No chambers echoing with her orders. No bench from which to look down. Just silence. Silence in place of the authority she once carried like a weapon. Silence where her voice had thundered for years. And that silence may have been the harshest verdict of all. But Elijah Cole's voice rose higher, steadier than the scandal, stronger than the noise that had nearly drowned the judiciary in shame. What began as a single revelation inside one courtroom had, by the time the Supreme Court convened again, transformed into something larger, a story that belonged to the nation. People did not just see him as a name etched into a marble wall of justices. They saw him as the man who once carried a broom into a courtroom, not for disguise, not for theatrics, but as a measure of how dignity could be tested, revealed, and defended. He was no longer just Justice Cole. He had become a symbol. And then came the words that sealed it. His first opinion from the bench, just one line in a dense legal document, spread faster than any ruling in years. Justice is measured not by titles, but by the way we honor those without them. It was not the kind of phrase courts usually produce. It was clear. It was human. And it resonated. Law students copied it into their notebooks with reverence. Professors dissected it in lecture halls. Clerks taped it to their desks like a compass. Even those outside the law repeated it because it sounded less like doctrine and more like truth. But it wasn't just words. Reforms followed. The administrative office of the courts, which for decades had operated quietly, was suddenly thrust into the light. New rules demanded mandatory reviews of federal judges every 5 years, reviews that could no longer be buried in locked drawers. A new division was created, its purpose simple but revolutionary: monitor complaints, publish them publicly, and document the outcomes. No more hidden settlements. No more 47 silenced voices tucked beneath red tape. For the first time in memory, the halls of justice were forced to turn their gaze inward. The system itself was on trial, and it was Elijah Cole's broom, symbolic as it had become, that had swept the dust into the open. At a ceremony in Washington, a moment unfolded that many thought impossible. A statement was read aloud before cameras, microphones, and the nation itself. Every citizen who enters these halls, whether attorney, witness, staff, or janitor, shall be treated with the dignity the Constitution promises. Anything less is a violation of justice itself. The words did not just rest on parchment. They were spoken into a microphone. They were recorded. They were entered into the record of history, impossible to erase. And as the months passed, something shifted in the way people spoke of him. He was not just Justice Cole, not just the new voice on the Supreme Court. He had become the people's justice. The justice who had not only read the law but lived beneath it, who had felt what it meant to be unseen, and who carried that humility all the way to the highest bench in the land. In coffee shops, classrooms, and courtrooms across the country, his name meant more than power. It meant a reminder that justice was not marble, or robes, or titles. It was how you treated the person who carried the broom. As for the memory of that courtroom, it remained a story passed from mouth to mouth. The day a judge laughed at a janitor, and the janitor answered with a truth that no one could dismiss. And now, it belongs to you, too. Because injustice rarely announces itself with banners or speeches. More often, it reveals itself in a smirk, in a laugh, in the way one person dismisses another as if they were invisible. And change, real change, begins the moment that laughter is challenged. So remember this: dignity is not optional. Respect is not earned only by titles. Justice belongs to those who carry it in their voice, in their choices, in the silence where others once stood ignored. Share this story with someone who still believes they are unseen. Let them hear it. Let them know that even the smallest voice can echo in the highest chambers. And never forget, the broom in a man's hand may sweep a floor today, but tomorrow, that same hand might write the words that reshape a nation. Now it's your turn. Like this, share it, and let's make sure no voice is ever dismissed again.